I found it the way you stumble upon a secret someone thought was buried. A small tube tucked neatly in the glove compartment of Martin's car. The kind of thing that doesn't belong there, not after nearly 40 years of marriage. The label was plain, discreet, as if that would disguise its meaning. My fingers tightened around it before I set it back down, careful not to smudge a trace. I shut the compartment with a quiet click and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, my reflection in the window staring back at me. 56 years old, hair pulled back from hours at the bakery, steady hands that have kneaded thousands of loaves. A woman who had given everything to family. And here I was, holding the first proof that my husband's promises were crumbs scattered for the birds. I didn't speak a word when Martin came home that evening. He strolled into the kitchen like a man arriving at his kingdom, dropping his blazer on the back of a chair, loosening his tie with exaggerated fatigue. "Late meeting with the contractor," he muttered, pouring himself a whiskey. Contractor. Always some faceless name to cover his tracks. He sat down at the table as if nothing in our life had shifted. I set the roast chicken on the table, the potatoes crisp and golden from the oven, and sat opposite him. He ate, eyes on his plate, not on me. When I leaned closer, the faint perfume of another woman rose from his shirt, floral, too young for him, too alien for our home. He never even noticed that I inhaled it like a slap. Humiliation doesn't always come with shouts. Sometimes it comes quietly, settling into the air like smoke. I smiled, but beneath the table, my nails dug crescents into my palm. Martin spoke of contracts and city permits, words falling from his mouth like coins with no value. I nodded when expected, though my mind was elsewhere, on that tube hidden in the car, on the perfume, on the gnawing certainty that my marriage was becoming a performance with an actor who had forgotten his lines. Later, after he collapsed on the sofa with his glass half empty, I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes. The house was silent except for the ticking of the old clock my mother gave us on our wedding day. Tick, 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 like a judge's gavel. I looked at Martin's reflection in the dark window, a man sleeping soundly while his wife drowned in suspicion. This was not the first sign. Days earlier, I had found a receipt folded inside his jacket pocket, a fancy steakhouse in San Antonio, dated the same night he swore he was in Dallas. Dinner for two. A bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, the very wine he had bought me for our 10th anniversary. Dessert, shared. I had snapped a photo on my phone, then placed the receipt back, my hands steady, though my chest felt like glass cracking under pressure. And then there was the email. I found it by accident, his phone, left on the table, screen glowing. Martin never used email. He always said technology confused him. But there it was, a short message that could have shattered a stronger woman. "You were incredible tonight." I froze, staring at the tiny red heart pulsing on the screen. The sender's address was a jumble of numbers, but the name at the top stopped my breath. Brianna, my daughter-in-law. The world tilted. Luke, my son, is 33, a firefighter, the kind of man who runs into burning buildings when others run out. He trusts people, just as I taught him to. And the woman he trusted with his heart, the one I taught to make flan, the one I hugged at every family dinner, the one I defended when neighbors whispered about her sharp tongue, she was betraying him with his father, with my husband. I sat there, phone in hand, the words echoing in my skull like a church bell. "You were incredible tonight." My lips moved soundlessly. My chest ached with something deeper than anger, something closer to death. That night, I said nothing. Martin came home smelling of whiskey and triumph. He kissed the air near my cheek and said, "Late call, big deal on the horizon." He poured himself another drink, humming as if life were ordinary. I stared at him, wondering how many lies a man could carry before they dragged him under. I lay in bed beside him, eyes open in the dark, while his snores filled the room. My thoughts churned. The tube, the receipt, the perfume, the email. Proof layered on proof. Humiliation layered on humiliation. I didn't cry. Instead, I began to plan. Rage makes you loud. Dignity makes you quiet, sharp, precise. By dawn, I was already at the bakery. The smell of yeast and sugar filled the kitchen as I pressed dough into shape, my arms steady, my heart burning. Baking has always been my refuge. The rhythm of kneading calms the mind, forces you into patience. Bread teaches you. Let it rise, don't rush, and when the heat comes, it transforms. Mabel stopped by mid-morning, as she often does when her lemon tree is overfull. She set a basket on the counter. "You look pale," she said softly. I didn't sleep. Her eyes, sharp and kind, lingered on me. She had been my neighbor for 30 years. She had seen me carry Luke as a baby, had shared coffee with me when my father died, had baked pies with me after long days. She didn't ask for details. Instead, she said, "If you need a number, I have one. A man who finds truths others try to bury." I hesitated, pride warring with pain. But then I nodded. "Give me the number." At noon, I met Thomas Nguyen in a cafe downtown. He was middle-aged, stocky, with eyes that saw too much. I slid an envelope across the table, photos of the receipt, a copy of the email, and a note about the gel in the car. "Follow him," I said. "And her." "I don't want rumors. I want proof." Thomas nodded, no judgment in his expression. "You'll have it." I returned to the bakery and spent the rest of the day serving customers with a smile, slicing loaves, wrapping pastries. Inside, I was hollow. Each time the doorbell chimed, I wondered if the world could see the betrayal written on my face. That evening, Martin walked through the door humming, as if the universe itself had blessed his lies. "Good news," he announced. "Might be a new deal coming. Don't wait up tomorrow night?" He kissed the top of my head, casual, dismissive. I smiled and poured his drink. "Of course," I said, voice smooth as honey. But in my mind, I was already listing steps. Step 1, gather everything. Step 2, guard the bakery. Step 3, guard Luke. Step 4, don't confront until the stage is set. And under it, one last line written in a hand, steadier than it should have been. Step 5, the swap. Because when betrayal is this deep, you don't scream, you don't beg, you plan, and you wait for the perfect moment to turn their secrets into their shame. Thomas didn't waste time. By the next evening, my phone buzzed with a message that turned my stomach inside out. "Got something. Meet me tomorrow at noon. Cafe Harborview." That night, I moved through the kitchen like a ghost. Martin sat at the table, telling some story about zoning permits and new business partners. His words slid over me like grease. I nodded where I was supposed to, but I was only half present, listening to the way the clock ticked louder than his voice. When he went upstairs, I stayed behind, wiping the counters already clean. I thought of Brianna, her bright laugh at family dinners, the way she used to ask me about recipes, the time I gave her my mother's handwritten card for caramel flan. I had believed she wanted to belong, to build a family with Luke. Instead, she was weaving lies with Martin. My Martin. The next day, I walked into the cafe with my scarf pulled tight, not because anyone cared what I was doing, but because shame makes you feel exposed, even in a crowd. Thomas sat in the corner, plain coffee in front of him, a manila folder at his elbow. He slid it across to me. Inside were photographs. Martin and Brianna at a small Italian place 2 towns over, her hand brushing his. His eyes locked on hers, not in the stiff way he looked at me lately, but soft, almost boyish. Another shot, the 2 of them outside a hotel, his hand at her back as he opened the door. They didn't look like in-laws. They looked like lovers who had long since stopped pretending otherwise. I closed the folder and pressed my palms flat on it, as though the weight could keep me from falling apart. "There's more," Thomas said quietly. "They've been meeting twice a week. Restaurants, a law office, and yesterday—" He hesitated, as if unsure if I wanted the knife turned deeper. "Yesterday, the Harborview Hotel, suite on the 3rd floor, all night." The air left my lungs, not because I didn't believe it, but because the proof made the betrayal solid, undeniable. My marriage wasn't fraying at the edges. It had already torn down the middle. "Keep watching," I whispered. "I need everything." Thomas nodded once. No sympathy, no pity, just professional clarity. I left the cafe with the folder pressed against my chest like a shield. Back at the bakery, I slid the photos into the cocoa tin with the receipt and the email screenshot. My archive of betrayal. Flour dust clung to my apron as I stood there, staring at the shelves of bread. Customers came in and out, smiling, thanking me for their loaves. They didn't know that the woman handing them pastries was holding her heart together with stitches of fury. That evening, Luke stopped by. He came in uniform, smelling faintly of smoke and sweat, hair damp from a shower at the firehouse. He grinned when he saw me, that same grin he'd had as a boy when he carried toy fire trucks across the living room floor. "Mom," he said, "you look tired. You working too hard again?" I wiped my hands on a towel and forced a smile. "The Grand Hotel doubled their order. Keeps me on my feet." He took a seat at the counter, drumming his fingers. "You should let Dad help more. Isn't he supposed to be retired by now?" The irony nearly choked me. "Your father has his projects," I said lightly. Luke frowned. "He's been off lately, distant. Is everything okay between you two?" I wanted to scream the truth, to tell him his father was betraying us both in the worst possible way. But my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. He deserved proof, not accusations. He deserved a mother who didn't collapse into tears at the counter. So instead, I said, "Don't worry about me. Just stay safe in those fires, Luke." He reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. Always. After he left, the bakery felt hollow. I stared at the trays of cooling bread, the yeast-scented air, the walls Martin had once helped paint. I whispered into the emptiness, "I'll protect you, Luke, even if it kills me." 2 days later, Thomas sent a video. Martin and Brianna at a law office, heads bent together over a stack of papers. Brianna had a pen in her hand, scribbling notes, while Martin nodded beside her. The caption from Thomas read, "Looks like transfer contracts, possibly bakery-related." I pressed play again and again, watching them lean close, their bodies angled like co-conspirators. That night, Martin brought home a folder. He set it on the kitchen table with false casualness. "Partnership contracts," he said. "Maybe you can look them over. Complicated stuff." I touched the folder lightly, not opening it. My voice was smooth as cream. "Tomorrow. I'm tired tonight." He shrugged, poured himself a drink, and rambled on about business. When he went upstairs, I slipped the folder into my bag. Under the bakery's fluorescent lights, I spread the papers across the counter. The words made my blood run cold. Transfer of management. Assets consolidated under a joint entity. Names: Martin Harris, Brianna Cole. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with clarity. They weren't just betraying me in bed. They were trying to steal my bakery, the work of my hands, my life's purpose. I scanned every page, saved digital copies, and returned the originals to the folder before dawn. He'd never know. He'd never guess that I already held the knife to his plan. For the next week, I lived a double life. By day, I was the bakery owner, smiling at customers, filling orders, chatting with neighbors. By night, I was the archivist of my own betrayal, saving every photo, every receipt, every email. The cocoa tin grew heavier, not with powder, but with truth. And through it all, Martin walked the house humming, careless, certain of his control. He didn't notice the way my smiles no longer reached my eyes. He didn't notice the silence in my voice when I wished him good night. Brianna, bold as ever, began sending me messages. At first polite, "We should talk," woman to woman, then defensive, "You don't have to make this ugly," finally cruel. "Luke doesn't need to know everything. We can all stay happy if you play along." Each message I saved, screenshot and filed. Each word another brick in the wall of their disgrace. The day came when I no longer trembled. When I looked at Martin across the dinner table and saw not my husband, but a man who had underestimated me. He passed me the bread basket, smiling as if the world were in order. I smiled back. My nails dug into my palm under the cloth. Because now, my plan was no longer just a thought scribbled in a notebook. It was ready, and the first step was already waiting in his car. The tube in the glove compartment. The tube he thought was secret. The tube I had already decided to swap for something far hotter than he ever imagined. The cocoa tin sat heavier on the pantry shelf each day. Not from sugar or powder, but from the weight of betrayal pressed into paper, ink, and digital files. Proof stacked upon proof until I no longer wondered if Martin and Brianna were guilty. The only question left was how far would they go, and how far would I? Thomas's updates came steadily, like waves hitting shore. A photo of Martin and Brianna leaving the notary's office, his hand brushing her arm. A video clip of them seated side by side in a hotel lobby, whispering with their heads bent close, her laugh bubbling up like champagne. Then, an audio file, muffled but clear enough. Brianna's voice. "Once the transfer's signed, Ellie won't have a say. She'll just be the face for the bakery. Nothing else." Martin's voice, low and confident. "She trusts me too much to suspect. We'll ease her out before she realizes." My stomach turned. They weren't only destroying my marriage. They were stripping me from my own life, my own work, my own name. I replayed the audio again and again until the words were etched into my bones. Each time I listened, I saw Luke's face, the son I raised to believe in loyalty, to run into fires instead of away. What would betrayal like this do to him? Would he crumble? Would he harden? I didn't want him destroyed by their lies. I wanted him to see them burned by their own flames, but not yet. Timing, like baking, is everything. Dough collapses if you rush. Truth does too. At night, lying in bed beside Martin's snoring body, I planned. I thought of the tube in his car, the one he tucked away like a teenager hiding secrets. I thought of the hot sauce bottles on the bakery's spice shelf, tiny glass jars filled with chili pepper so sharp you could smell the fire through the cork. I thought of humiliation, not hidden in whispers, but spilling out in daylight where everyone could see. I imagined him reaching for that tube one evening, confident, smug, certain that he was clever. And then the burn, the shock, the panic, the scramble for relief, the calls for help, the way truth would race faster than he could contain it. That image steadied me more than any prayer. Still, I had to act carefully. This wasn't about violence. It was about exposure, justice, not cruelty. So I moved in small steps. One night, while Martin snored with a whiskey glass still on the nightstand, I slipped the car keys from his pocket and padded into the garage. The SUV sat heavy in the dark, its leather seats still carrying that perfume that wasn't mine. I opened the glove compartment. The tube was there, lying smugly between receipts and a spare pair of sunglasses. I held it in my hand for a long moment, feeling the weight of what it represented, not just betrayal, but arrogance. A symbol of how he believed he could use me as cover while building a secret life with Brianna. I placed it on the workbench and replaced it with another tube, same size, same shape, but carefully emptied and refilled with chili pepper concentrate from the bakery. I had funneled it drop by drop until the tube was full, capped it, wiped it clean. To the eye, it was the same. To the skin, it would be a storm. I slid it into the glove box, adjusted the papers exactly as they had been, and closed it softly. The swap was done. The trap was set. Back in the house, I returned the keys to his nightstand, washed my hands with lemon soap until the sting of pepper faded, and sat in the dark living room with a book open on my lap. The words swam unread before me. All I could see was tomorrow, or the day after, or whenever fate decided to make Martin careless enough to reach for that tube. The next morning, he was up early, cheerful, humming as if the universe itself were on his side. He kissed the top of my head and said, "Long day ahead, might be late." He left without noticing the faint smile on my lips. Later that afternoon, Luke dropped by again, in uniform, looking tired but steady. He poured himself coffee at the counter and studied me with those clear firefighter eyes that see more than most. "Mom," he said slowly, "I feel like something's wrong. With you. With Dad. You're holding back." I wanted to tell him everything, to show him the folder, the photos, the recordings, but I couldn't, not yet. The truth is heavy. Drop it too soon, and it crushes. Drop it at the right time, and it shatters chains. So I smiled, poured him a slice of apple pie, and said, "You just worry too much, Luke." He sighed but didn't push. He ate the pie, kissed my forehead, and left for his night shift. When he was gone, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the cocoa tin on the pantry shelf. It was fuller now. Photos of Martin and Brianna entering a hotel together. More receipts, more screenshots of her arrogant messages. Every piece was fuel. Every piece would burn when the time came. That evening, Martin came home late again, tie loosened, hair mussed, smelling faintly of perfume. He poured himself whiskey, looked at me with that easy smile that had once charmed me as a girl, and said, "Don't wait up tomorrow either. Big week?" I nodded, smiling back. My hands rested calmly in my lap, nails pressing crescents into my skin. Because I already knew tomorrow wasn't his big week, it was mine. For in the dark of the garage, the swap had been made. The chili pepper was waiting, and sooner than he realized, it would send him running, not to Brianna, not to another hotel, but to the ER, exposed, humiliated, and finally stripped of the power he thought he held over me. The house was quiet that Thursday evening, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own breath. I'd just closed the bakery, flour still clinging to my sleeves, when Martin walked in with unusual brightness in his step. He had dressed carefully, blue shirt pressed, shoes polished, hair combed back with the vanity of a younger man. "Don't wait up," he said with a wink, reaching for his keys. "Of course," I replied. My voice was honey. Inside, I was steel. I watched from the window as his SUV rolled down the street, carrying him to what he thought was another night of secret indulgence. He didn't know that betrayal has a shelf life, and his had just expired. Hours later, my phone buzzed. Thomas again. A photo. Martin and Brianna entering a rented flat near Harborview, bags in hand, laughing. The caption read, "Your swap might be tested tonight." I stared at the screen, steady as stone. Then I put the phone down, brewed myself tea, and waited. The first call came not from Martin, but from a neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, who had lived across the street for decades. Her voice quivered with equal parts shock and delight. "Ellie, you won't believe this. An ambulance just pulled up outside Harborview Flats. Folks say Martin was carried out, yelling about burning skin, and Brianna, Lord, she was right there, frantic as could be." "What happened?" I pinched the bridge of my nose, forcing a tremor into my voice. I don't know, Mrs. Peterson. Thank you for telling me." When I hung up, I allowed myself a thin smile. The pepper had done its work. Not cruelty, justice. He had carried his secrets in a tube. Now the tube had carried him straight into exposure. Within minutes, Thomas sent another update. A blurry video of Martin being hustled into the back of an ambulance, face twisted in pain, clutching at his clothes, Brianna beside him in a panic, A crowd had gathered, neighbors whispering, phones raised. The whispers would spread faster than flames in dry brush. At the ER, Martin was admitted under severe skin reaction, unknown substance. The doctor's notes would later call it acute contact dermatitis with capsaicin exposure. But the crowd outside didn't need medical terms. They only needed the sight of Brianna guiding him inside, her hand on his back, her face pale and guilty. By dawn, the whole town knew. At the bakery, customers came in with wide eyes, speaking in lowered voices. "Ellie, did you hear? Poor Martin had some terrible accident. They say he was with Brianna. Isn't she your daughter-in-law? What a scandal. How are you holding up?" I smiled politely, wrapping loaves, slicing flan, handing out change. My heart was calm, not because the pain had gone, but because dignity was finally returning to me piece by piece. Behind the counter, Mabel leaned close. "You planned this," she whispered, eyes sharp. I gave her a look that was half amusement, half warning. Planned? No, but when liars walk into fire, they shouldn't be surprised when it burns. That evening, Luke arrived at the bakery, still in uniform, exhaustion etched into his face. He leaned on the counter, arms crossed, eyes searching mine. "Mom," he said, voice low. "I was at the ER today. Dad was brought in, and Brianna was with him." I steadied myself, placing my palms on the counter. "And?" His jaw tightened. "Tell me the truth. Is there something between them?" For a moment, silence pressed against my ears like water. Then I exhaled. "Yes, Luke, there is." His eyes closed, his head bowed. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice cracked like timber under weight. "How long?" "Long enough," I said softly. "But I didn't want you to hear it from me. I wanted you to see it for yourself, and now you have." He turned away, fists clenched. His whole body shook, not from weakness, but from the fury of a man who had been blindsided by the two people he trusted most. I came around the counter and laid a hand on his shoulder. "We'll get through this, you and I, together." He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak. Then he left, shoulders squared against the night. Back home, I opened the cocoa tin again. The photos, the emails, the recordings, the copies of contracts. They weren't just scraps of betrayal anymore. They were weapons, proof I would soon lay before the world, before the courts, before everyone who had once believed Martin's lies. I stacked them neatly, slid them into a folder, and whispered to the empty kitchen, "You wanted to burn me out of my own life. Now you'll burn in the light of day." Because humiliation wasn't over. The pepper had only started the fire. The real exposure was still to come. The ambulance incident had cracked their mask, but cracks weren't enough. Martin and Brianna still thought they could patch it, still believed they could rewrite the story to make me the bitter wife inventing rumors. That was the danger of liars. They confuse volume with truth. So I decided to give them an audience. I called it a community appreciation dinner. The Lighthouse Grill, a little seaside place with crab cakes and white string lights, was happy to host. "Just a small gathering," I told the manager. "Suppliers, neighbors, family, to say thank you." He smiled, promised the long table, perfect. Long tables were made for stories. I invited Jorge and Denise, the flour and sugar suppliers who had stood by me through shortages. I invited Mrs. Peterson because she knew half the neighborhood and carried news faster than any reporter. I invited Pastor Ruth, who had the kind of voice that could silence a room without raising it. And of course, I invited Luke. When I called him, I said simply, "Son, I need you to be there. Don't ask why." He hesitated, then answered, "If you're asking, I'll come." As for Martin, I only sent a text, "Dinner at Lighthouse Grill, 7 p.m., bring the contracts, we'll celebrate the new partnership." His reply came in seconds, "Perfect, see you there." I didn't bother inviting Brianna. I knew she'd follow him like perfume follows lies. The day of the dinner, I baked 2 flans, one for sweetness, one for symbolism. I caramelized the sugar until it cracked like glass, a sound that steadied me more than any prayer. I packed them carefully, then slipped my folder of evidence into my bag, the cocoa tin's contents neatly organized, receipts, photos, contracts, audio transcripts, my archive of betrayal polished into weapons. At the restaurant, the long table gleamed under the string lights, plates set, glasses waiting, the air thick with salt and anticipation. One by one, guests arrived, filling the seats with warm chatter. Mabel squeezed my hand under the table. "Steady," she whispered. Luke arrived in his navy shirt, sleeves rolled, looking more like the man of the house than Martin ever had. He kissed my cheek, his eyes searching. "What's really happening tonight?" "You'll see," I said softly. At 7:10, Martin arrived, late as usual, but not enough to draw suspicion. He wore the blazer I'd given him on our 25th anniversary, as if parading a relic of old loyalty could still fool me. And beside him, Brianna, in a cream dress, her lipstick sharp, her arm brushing his as though the whole town were blind. Luke stiffened when he saw her. "Bree!" His voice was half shock, half warning. She leaned in for a kiss on the cheek. "Luke, what a nice surprise." Her smile was polished, too polished. Martin clapped his son on the back, his tone easy. "Didn't know you'd be here, son. Glad you came." Luke's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. We ate the first course, crab cakes and lemon, small talk floating like meaningless currency. Martin was relaxed, too relaxed, certain the world was still his stage. Brianna laughed too loudly, her hand brushing his arm once, twice, enough for those watching to raise their brows. Then I tapped my glass. Not hard, just enough. The room stilled. "Friends," I began, my voice carrying without effort. "Thank you for coming tonight. I wanted to express gratitude for your support, your loyalty, your faith in Honey Harbor Bakery. Without you, I wouldn't be here." Smiles, nods, relief. People liked gratitude. It was familiar, safe. But, I continued, gratitude also means honesty. And tonight, I want to share the truth. I placed the folder on the table and slid out the first photo. Martin and Brianna outside Harbor View, his hand at her back. I set it in the center of the table. The room inhaled as one. Luke froze, his eyes narrowing. "Ellie," Martin said quickly, voice half laugh, "let's not bore everyone with private family nonsense." I ignored him. I slid out the next photo. Brianna's face tilted toward him at the Italian restaurant, his gaze locked on hers with softness I hadn't seen in decades. "Mom," Luke whispered, his voice breaking. "What is this?" "It's the truth," I said, steady. "And I'm sorry you had to see it this way." Brianna's laugh was brittle. "This is cruel. You've misunderstood." I raised a hand. Better to listen than to lie. I pressed play on the small recorder. Their voices filled the air. "Brianna, once the transfer's signed, Ellie won't have a say. She'll just be the face for the bakery, nothing else." "Martin, she trusts me too much to suspect. We'll ease her out before she realizes." Gasps, whispers. Jorge muttered a curse. Pastor Ruth's lips pressed thin. Mrs. Peterson's hand flew to her chest. Luke's chair scraped back. He stood, looming, fists clenched. His eyes burned at Martin. "You were going to steal Mom's bakery." "With her?" Martin's face crumpled. "Son, listen. Marriages are complicated." "Don't," Luke snapped, his voice sharp as flame. "Don't insult me with excuses." Brianna reached for his arm. "Luke, we were going to tell you, but—" He shook her off. "Tell me what? That you betrayed me with my own father? That you planned to rob the woman who gave you everything?" Silence roared louder than shouting. The entire table sat frozen. eyes locked on the wreckage unfolding before them. I stood slowly, my palms pressed flat on the table. Martin, Brianna, you thought you could hide. You thought you could cheat me, cheat Luke, cheat this community that has supported us for years. But lies, like bread left too long, always rot. I opened the folder further, sliding out the contracts. Here's the proof. The transfer papers, signed not with honesty, but with betrayal. Names, Martin Harris, Brianna Cole. Gasps again. Denise shook her head. After all she's built. Martin's face was gray. He stammered, "Ellie, please, don't..." "Don't what?" I asked. My voice was ice. "Don't show the truth? Don't let our son see the man his father became?" Luke's chest heaved. He turned to Brianna, his voice low, deadly. "Take off that ring." She blinked. "Luke, now!" Her hand trembled as she pulled the band from her finger and set it on the table. It clinked against the wood, the sound of a bond shattered. Martin reached for Luke. "Son!" But Luke stepped back, eyes burning. "Don't call me that. Not tonight. Not ever again if you choose her." The room held its breath. The mural of pelicans above us seemed to lean closer, as if the walls themselves wanted to witness. I lifted the flan from its dish, placed it at the center of the table, and cracked the caramel top with the back of a spoon. The sharp crack echoed like a verdict. "This is dessert," I said evenly. "Sweetness after bitterness. But for you, Martin, for you, Brianna, there will be no sweetness. Only the aftertaste of your own choices." The guests shifted uncomfortably, torn between pity and disgust. Some shook their heads, some whispered. A few looked at me with admiration. Martin's voice broke. "Ellie, please, don't end 40 years like this." 38, I corrected. "Don't give yourself credit you didn't earn." Brianna's mask cracked. Tears streaked her face, smearing her makeup into lines. "Luke, I love you. I made a mistake." But Luke's expression was carved from stone. Love doesn't destroy. Mistakes don't last this long. You made choices. He turned and walked out, leaving the ring on the table. The room buzzed with whispers, the sound of reputations shifting. Martin slumped in his chair, hollow. Brianna covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. I stood tall, folder in hand, evidence stacked like bricks of truth. You wanted to steal my life. Tonight, I've stolen your mask. From this moment, the world knows who you are. And tomorrow, the court will too. The long table, once set for gratitude, had become a courtroom, and I was the judge, the jury, and the witness. But the sentence wasn't finished yet. That would come next. Morning came like a subpoena, bright, unavoidable, written across the sky. I woke before the alarm, pulled on the navy cardigan Luke always said made me look official, and set water to boil. Tea steadies the hands before justice steadies the heart. On the kitchen table, my folder of evidence lay neatly squared, corners aligned, receipts, photos, audio transcripts, copies of those crooked contracts. The cocoa tin sat beside it, retired from duty now, a small soldier who'd done its job. A knock sounded. 3 firm taps. Mabel. She came in without waiting, as friends with 30 years of permission do, carrying a paper bag that smelled like warm cinnamon. "They'll try to come at you on an empty stomach," she said, setting down sticky buns. "I'm not letting them." Her voice belonged to a woman who had stood in a lot of kitchens and watched a lot of storms pass. "You ready?" "I am," I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. Ready enough. By 9, James, my lawyer with the surgical calm, had texted. "Sheriff served the injunctions at 7:43 a.m. Hotel desk confirmed delivery to room 312. Notary received our letter at 7:35 and called to acknowledge. He won't notarize anything for Martin or Brianna." I exhaled so slowly it felt like I'd been holding my breath since my wedding day. "Good," I replied. "Let the papers speak." At 9:30, another message came in. Tom, my quiet shadow. Local news wants you at 1 p.m. outside Honey Harbor. Segment on protecting women-owned businesses from predatory transfers. That phrasing okay? I stared at the words. Women-owned, predatory transfers. They were clean labels for messy human behavior, but sometimes neat boxes help other women find the door. Yes, I typed. Let's do it. By 10, Martin's car rolled past the house. He slowed as if he might stop, but the restraining order around the bakery properties and the line we'd drawn at our front door meant that stopping would be more than a bad idea. It would be a violation. He didn't park. He kept going, the way a man keeps driving after missing an exit because admitting it means turning around in front of everyone. I spent the late morning at the bakery. The bell over the door chimed its cheery note, oblivious to scandal. Regulars filed in with soft eyes and careful words. Ellie, dear, we're rooting for you. We always knew who kept this place standing. If you need a day off, I'll sit here and sell bread for free. Every offer warmed me and wore me out at the same time. Community is like yeast, invisible until it lifts you. At 12:52, the news van turned the corner and parked across the street, the tower of its antenna telescoping up like a curious neck. A reporter in a slate blazer hopped out, followed by a cameraman with a shoulder he'd surely iced every night. The reporter approached with that half-smile they teach them in journalism school, earnest but not intrusive. Miss Harris, I'm Dana. Thank you for speaking with us. I nodded. We'll keep it to the facts. The camera's red light blinked on. I stood in front of my bakery's hand-painted sign, Honey Harbor in scalloped letters, and told the story without adjectives. I talked about paperwork that moves assets out of women's hands under the soft blanket of help. I talked about signatures that look like safety until you read the fine print and realize you've been written out of your own life. I didn't say Pepper. I didn't say ER. I didn't say affair. I said attempted transfer, misrepresentation, betrayal of trust. Dana listened, head tilted, then asked, "What would you say to other women watching who suspect something like this is happening to them?" I looked straight through the lens and imagined the faces of women at kitchen tables across town, across state lines, across oceans, women older than me, younger than me, exactly like me in the ways that matter. You don't have to scream to be heard, I said quietly. Collect the truth, make copies, guard your work, guard your name, and when the time comes, bring daylight. Darkness is where liars prosper. Dana swallowed hard. Thank you, Mrs. Harris. The camera light went dark. The cameraman lowered his burden. The reporter squeezed my hand, 1 second, delicate. For what it's worth, she said, my mother ran a diner for 30 years. This matters. When they left, I leaned on the counter and felt my bones, not old, used, not brittle, tempered. I wasn't made of glass after all. I was tempered steel inside a baker's cardigan. The hearing was the following Tuesday. Courthouse hallways always smell like floor polish and decisions. James met me on the steps with the stack of filings and that small, satisfied nod good lawyers cultivate when the facts are on their side. Luke was there too, in his off-duty jacket, face drawn but steady. He hugged me, not too tight. Whatever happens in there, he said, I'm with you. Martin arrived late, predictably, and took a seat at the far end of the hallway. He'd shaved carefully, his suit fit, but his eyes couldn't find a place to rest that wasn't the floor. Brianna sat beside him with a scarf wrapped like a truce flag, lips pressed thin. She didn't look at Luke. He didn't look at her. When our case was called, we filed in. The judge, mid-50s, silver hair, the expression of someone who has seen every pattern and still refuses to get bored by them, reviewed the stack in front of her. James spoke sparely. Your Honor, my client owns Honey Harbor Bakery outright. The respondents attempted to transfer assets and intellectual property under false pretenses, while engaging in conduct that undermined my client's business operations and safety. He didn't say gel, he didn't say pepper, he didn't need to. The judge turned pages. The evidence is abundant. She looked at Martin. Mr. Harris, do you contest your signature on these drafts? Martin glanced sideways at Brianna, then down. No, Your Honor. But there was no final transfer. You were going to move assets without the owner's informed consent. The judge's voice could slice bread. Not today, and not on my docket. She addressed me. Miss Harris, you did well to act swiftly. The injunction will remain. We'll set a schedule for formal separation proceedings. In the meantime, the respondents are prohibited from contacting your vendors, employees, or accessing any business records. Violations will result in sanctions. Brianna's lawyer, a man with a tie aggressively blue, cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client is facing severe reputational harm. Consequences and harm are cousins, the judge said dryly. One visits after the other calls. She banged the gavel once. Adjourned. Outside, on the courthouse steps, the sunlight hit like a benediction. Luke stood with his hands in his pockets, staring somewhere past the oak trees as if calculating the distance to a fire no one else could see. I thought it would feel like winning, he said finally. It feels like standing in the ash after the flames are out. Ash is clean, I said. You can plant in ash. He blinked, then nodded. Okay. That evening, the neighborhood moved like it always does, dogs tugging their owners, sprinklers clicking, the muffled chorus of televisions through screen doors, but the glances were different, not pitying, assessing. People adjust their understanding of you the way they adjust a picture frame that's been crooked for years. Oh, that's how it was meant to hang. Mrs. Peterson brought a casserole for the fridge, for the days when eating feels like work. Jorge left a sack of flour on the porch with a note. Para tu fuerza. Denise tucked a bouquet of basil into my mailbox. The basil made me cry, the one green thing I hadn't expected to see that week. Martin texted that night. Let me come by to talk. I stared at the screen until the letters fuzzed. Then I typed what I wish I'd learned to say earlier in life. No. Put it in writing. Send it to my lawyer. For years, he'd used the kitchen table as a shield against consequences. Smile, pour a drink, tell a story, and all would be forgiven. Tables are for meals now, not negotiations. Brianna texted 3 times. The first, a plea, please don't ruin me online. I can't take the comments. The second, an accusation. You turned Luke against me. That's cruel. The third, the closest thing to truth. How did you know? I didn't answer any of them. Silence can be sterile. It can also be medicinal. Weeks passed. The news segment aired and, to my surprise, traveled far. Women stopped me in the aisle of the grocer to say, I watched your clip 3 times. I copied my lease today. A high school girl rang up my coffee and whispered, my mom wants to leave my stepdad, but he handles the bills. How do we start? I handed her a Honey Harbor punch card with James's office number scrawled across the back. Collect, copy, call, the 3 C's that had kept me from drowning. The bakery stayed busy, then got busier. The Grand Hotel increased their order again. We started stocking a new shelf, loaves and lessons, a tiny display with recipe cards on one side and little printed checklists on the other. Documents to copy, red flags in contracts. What to say when someone tries to rush you. The cards were free. They went fast. I watched women tuck them into purses like talismans and thought, if my humiliation buys someone else's map out of the maze, then I won a kind of lottery I never asked to enter. Luke crashed at the firehouse for a while, then moved into a small apartment near the pier, a place with big windows and a stubborn radiator that clanked on cold mornings. He came by my place most evenings, sometimes saying nothing, eating soup at my kitchen table while we listened to the overall hush of a town that still believed in bedtime. Sometimes he talked. Once he said, "I keep replaying memories, trying to find the moment when I should have known." "That game has no prize," I said gently. "Your job is to run into fires, not into the past." He smiled at that, small, real. "You're getting good at this." "Practice," I shrugged. One Saturday, he brought over a cardboard box and set it on the table. Inside was the framed wedding photo I'd pulled off my wall the night everything broke. Luke and Brianna under an arch of eucalyptus and white ribbon, Martin and me beside them, all of us sunlit and unaware. Luke touched the glass. "I can't look at this without seeing the after." He shook his head. "You keep it or break it. Your choice." We carried it to the porch and leaned it against the railing. The Gulf breeze flicked the ribbon in the photo as if it had a heartbeat. I thought about smashing it. The theater of destruction has its own seduction. But then I pictured setting the glass rattling, shards skittering across the planks, the neighbor kid stepping on one. I pictured sweeping and still finding glittering slivers for months. That's the thing about breaks. Pieces hide. "Let's not make more mess," I said. We wrapped the frame in brown paper and slid it into the bin for the church rummage sale. Maybe someone would reuse the frame for a new story. Maybe that's what mercy looks like when you're too tired to invent the word for it. Martin moved into a rented apartment near the marina. I heard it in the way small towns hear everything. The post office clerk mentioned a forwarding address. The barista mentioned a new regular who nursed tea instead of whiskey. He didn't come by again. He sent one letter through James acknowledging the separation and asking for a list of belongings to retrieve. I made a list devoid of sentiment. Work boots, toolbox, a stack of trade magazines, his grandfather's fishing rod. It read like an inventory of a life I could finally admit I'd tried too hard to save from itself. Brianna left town for a while. Rumor had it she went to stay with a cousin 3 counties over, which is small-town code for exile. A month later, she emailed Luke to ask for a meeting for closure. He forwarded it to me with a single line. "Do I owe her that?" I typed, "You owe yourself peace. If a meeting buys it, go. If it costs it, pass." In the end, he declined. Closure is a door you shut from the inside. One afternoon, the news station followed up with a small segment on our loaves and lessons display. They filmed me bagging bread and talking about how recipes and rites both require exact measurements. 2 cups flour, 1 cup sugar, 4 copies of your tax records, 3 questions for any contract, who benefits, who decides, who pays. The cameraman bought cinnamon knots for his kids. Dana asked for a second interview. "Sometime when the dust settles." I laughed. Dust never settles in a bakery. We make more. On a Sunday, I took a bus to the next town over and sat in the back pew of a church with good stained glass. Pastor Ruth saw me and nodded, the kind of nod that says, not "I see you," but "I see you seeing yourself." Afterward, we walked the small square and she said, "Justice gives back what was stolen. Dignity gives you back what you gave away without knowing." I tucked that into my pocket like a receipt I never wanted to lose. At home that evening, I opened my notebook, the one that had held my lists when my hands were shaking the first time I wrote them. On a clean page, I wrote a new recipe. Ingredients for peace. 1 cup truth, sifted. 2 cups boundaries, packed. 1 tablespoon humor, heaping. A pinch of anger, don't overmix. Enough time to rise, as long as it takes. Directions. Knead gently. Forgive only what won't regrow. Bake at the temperature of your own choosing. Serve to yourself first. I tore the page out and taped it to the inside of the pantry door where the cocoa tin used to sit. I left the tin there, empty and honest. A reminder that containers hold what you put in them, and so do lives. Weeks turned into months, the way they always do unless you stop counting. The bakery hired a second morning baker, Ray, a 20-something with forearms like rope and a laugh that made the oven seem to sing back. "Teach me your flan," she begged, eyes bright. I did, passing the whisk like a baton in a race. I suddenly understood I didn't have to win alone. Some mornings, I let Ray open while I walked down to the pier and watched boats nose into the water like curious dogs. Pelicans sketched arcs. I learned the names of a few fishermen and the names of two kinds of cloud I'd always just called pretty. On the day the judge finalized the separation orders, I baked a small cake that wasn't on the menu. Lemon with basil syrup, the garden and the kitchen in one slice. Mabel came over, and we ate 2 pieces on the porch while the evening wore gold. "He could have been different," she said, not unkindly. "He could have," I agreed. Sometimes the shortest sentences carry the most weight. We sat a long time without layering meaning on top of the quiet. When she left, I rinsed the plates and set them in the rack, each dish a small white moon catching kitchen light. I looked at the clock my mother had given us and didn't hear a gavel anymore. I heard time, patient, indifferent, generous if you earn it. The next morning, Luke showed up with a cardboard box and a grin that didn't apologize for itself. "I brought something," he said. He pulled out a framed print, my handwriting enlarged and neat, ingredients for dignity. He'd taken the scrap from my notebook to a print shop and made it into wall art. "For the bakery office," he said, sheepish and proud at once. I laughed, caught off guard by how much it moved me. "Put it up," I said, "high enough that I have to stand on a chair to take it down when I forget." He hammered a nail into the office wall and hung it. We stood there shoulder to shoulder, looking at the words. He slid an arm around me. "We're okay, Mom." "Yes," I said, and the words stuck to my ribs in the best way. "We are." You might wonder about the pepper. Does he still feel it? That's not my story to tell anymore. The burn's healed. The lesson is scar deep. Sometimes pain is a message written in a language the body refuses to forget. I didn't choose that language for him. He chose the dictionary it came from. What I chose was light. Light in courtrooms, light in living rooms, light on camera. Light above a long table where people saw him and her and me and decided who they were going to be about it. A month after the hearing, I hosted another dinner at the Lighthouse Grill. No long table, no witnesses, just a handful of women who run businesses that keep this town quietly fed and clothed and clean. We traded supplier tips and small victories. Denise negotiated better sugar prices. Jorge's cousin opened a delivery service. Ray developed a rye loaf that makes even rye skeptics nod. We toasted with iced tea. Pastor Ruth, invited as friend, not clergy, raised her glass and said, "To women who learned to see in the dark and decided to put up lights." The room hummed in agreement. Not loud, enough. And now, here you are, at the end of my story, or at least the end of this chapter. Maybe you held your breath when I swapped that tube. Maybe you exhaled when the siren wailed. Maybe you saw yourself not in the pepper, not in the ER, but in the way a woman can fold a life back into shape after it's been crumpled like a receipt in someone else's pocket. If any of this touched the soft or stubborn part of you, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. Pass this story to the friend who needs to remember that dignity is not loud, but it is bright. Subscribe if you want more stories where women don't just survive the plot, they edit it. As for the moral, it isn't complicated. Boundaries are love turned inward. Justice is love turned outward. And dignity is what stays when the applause ends and you're alone in your kitchen, washing 2 plates after a quiet victory, the clock on the wall finally sounding like time again. Not a countdown, not a sentence, just the steady metronome of a life you've chosen, measure by measure, beat by beat.